Welcome to today's edition of Liberty Action Network TV. I'm your host, Doreen Finkel. And today, folks, we are going to be talking about immigration reform from the north, the south, the east, and the west, and basically all 50 states. Joining with me today is former INS agent, special agent, Michael Cutler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Doreen, and thank you for covering this very important topic.
And if you can tell us, give us a little bit of background about what you do.
Okay, fine. Well, I was with the INS for 30 years. I began my career as an inspector at Kennedy Airport. For one of those 4 years, I was also assigned as an adjudications officer, doing those marriage interviews like you see in the movies. And then in 1975, I became what used to be called a criminal investigator. Today, that job is known as a special agent. I rotated through all the divisions within the investigations branch. In 1988, I was the first immigration agent assigned to the Unified Intelligence Division of the Drug Enforcement Administration in New York City. And in 1991, I was promoted to the position of senior special agent and assigned to the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. My career, as I say, spans some 30 years. And I came to realize the true importance of immigration. And I think it's really important for the listeners, the viewers out there to know that our immigration laws exist principally for two purposes: protect innocent lives and protect the jobs of American workers. And so I think that the work that immigration enforcement officers do is critically important for a host of issues, beginning with the issue of national security and public safety.
And so what would you say today is wrong with our immigration system? Start with.
Well, we could have a much shorter conversation if you asked me what was right with the immigration system. Okay. The problem is that it's kind of like an airplane with a lot of dysfunctional parts, and it crashes and burns every day, and we pay the price for this every day. If you want to go back to the 9/11 Commission and to go a little bit further into my background, I've testified before something like 15 or 16 congressional hearings, the first of which was back on May 20th, 1997, when I was called by the House Judiciary Committee, and I testified before the Subcommittee on Immigration and Claims back then on the issue of visa fraud and immigration benefit fraud. And what benefit fraud means, it's not benefits like welfare or that sort of thing, but it means giving aliens the authority to attend school, obtain a green card, become a naturalized United States citizen. And I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, if you will. I'm going to use the word alien. I know a lot of people get upset with that word. And I think it's important for clarity that we dispel any wrong-headed notions about what the term alien really means.
So go ahead, tell us what it means.
Sure. Thought you'd never ask.
Okay.
An alien under the immigration laws are defined simply as any person not a citizen or national of the United States. It's not a pejorative. It's not an insult. It doesn't say that you're dumb or that you're a bad person. It simply says you are in the United States, but you're not a citizen. And if Americans travel to foreign countries under international law, we become aliens in those other countries. So there's no insult. But I think that the open borders folks, the people I've come to think of as the immigration anarchists, don't like the word because it provides clarity to the debate. And if we're going to have an honest discussion, then we need factually accurate and neutral language. And I think it's important to start with the word alien and the fact that that's the easiest and most accurate way to describe a non-citizen present in the United States.
So is that why they use the word undocumented?
Yes, I think that the idea is to minimize the impact and to make it sound as though it's not a big deal. And, you know, it's kind of funny because, in my mind, undocumented is more disconcerting than alien. Because if somebody is undocumented, it means they have no reliable, authentic way to prove their true identities. And if we look at what the 9/11 Commission had to say about that, and in fact, I provided testimony to the 9/11 Commission, as well as a host of congressional committees and subcommittees, the embedding tactic of choice of the terrorists who attacked us, not only on 9/11, but at other instances, was to conceal their true identities and their true intentions when they got to the United States. And in fact, if you look at the immigration laws, they were designed for the purpose, as I say, of protecting innocent lives and the jobs of Americans. And I'm going to just give one or two sections of law during our conversation. But I do this because I want the folks out there to be able to verify what I'm telling you. I will not say anything that can't be verified. If you go to Title 8 of the United States Code, Section 1182, that lists the categories of aliens who are deemed excludable, that we're supposed to keep out. And it starts with aliens who have dangerous communicable diseases. Let's remember Ellis Island was, after all, a quarantine station. Aliens who suffer mental illness and are very violent or are sex offenders, convicted felons, human rights violators, war criminals, spies, terrorists, those who would become public charges, or those foreign nationals who would take the jobs that Americans desperately need in order to support themselves. And in fact, prior to the Second World War, the Labor Department was in charge of administering and enforcing the immigration laws. So for those folks who think that the immigration laws aren't a big deal, my question then would be, do you think it's not a good idea to keep people out of the United States whose presence poses a threat to national security or public safety or the livelihood and futures of American citizens of every race, religion, and ethnicity?
And so let me ask you, those who come through our system, let's say they come through an airport,
right,
with a visa, and we lose them, and then they commit a crime,
right,
and which involves killing or something. What kind of effect does that have upon a family?
Well, it has a huge effect, but it isn't even only to the point of murder. And of course it has a big effect. And then, of course, the other side will say, well, you know, Americans commit murder. And if you remember, Al Capone, who did so much destruction, was ultimately brought down because of tax evasion. So you use whatever tools you can use if you're trying to get bad guys off the street. And, you know, one of the other sad things is that the accusations that fly from the other side, well, this is about not liking Mexicans, this is about race, this is about hate. It isn't. In point of fact, the immigration laws make absolutely no distinction about race, religion, or ethnicity. And in fact, as an immigration agent, I can tell you that I've arrested thousands of aliens who violated the immigration laws, and many of the people I investigated and arrested didn't come from Latin America. They came from Africa, they came from Europe, they came from Canada, they came from the Middle East, Asia. So the law is very specific, and I can assure you that there's nothing that discriminates by any of those factors that we keep hearing about. And that's why I get kind of crazy when I hear about this mythical Latino vote. You know, we hear it all the time. Politicians are chasing this vote. They're chasing ghosts. Because, first of all, it's a horrible form of profiling, in my judgment, to talk about the Latino vote. You mean to say that if you know that someone's last name is Rodriguez, or if we're going to talk about the Jewish vote, Goldstein, that we now know all we need to know about that person to determine what's of importance to them and what they think is valuable? You know, profiling is widely criticized unless it's done very carefully, very properly, where you're looking at situational components as well as other factors. And to simply talk about the Latino vote, we know who people are going to vote for if they're Hispanic, is insulting to all people. It provides the mistaken notion that if you're a Latino, you're probably an illegal alien, which is nuts. We have many millions of Americans who are multi-generational Americans who themselves have served honorably in the military, as did their fathers and grandfathers and uncles. So imagine the insult inherent in talking about this mythical Latino vote of people that don't want our borders secure, don't want our immigration laws enforced. And ironically, the most likely victims of the violence perpetrated by transnational criminals are the members of the immigrant community of every ethnicity, whether it's the Russian mob, Asian organized crime, the Jamaican drug posses, or MS-13 or the Mexican cartels. So this spans all sorts of barriers, all sorts of racial groups and so forth. But there's a mythology because there's a lot of people looking to make a lot of money from this situation.
And and also, let's say, again, they come through our system, we lose them.
And we lose a lot of them. There was just an article where they lost track of over 1 million. Over 1 million. Is that not staggering?
Oh, my goodness.
Do you know that the Washington Post reported, I think it was in 2007, they were referring to an investigation done by the General Accountability Office. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the division of DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. I call it the Department of Homeland Surrender, by the way. It's gotten so dysfunctional. Claimed to have lost 111,000 immigration files relating to benefits filed for everything from residency to citizenship. They naturalized over 30,000 aliens without their files. Talk about flying blindly.
Oh, wow.
And remember, U.S. citizenship is the key to the kingdom.
Right, right.
So think about this level of threat that this poses. But meanwhile, we're all but strip searching American citizens who simply want to get on an airplane to visit loved ones on the other side of the country.
Right. So now these individuals come in our country and they find a lover and perhaps have a family here, or they reproduce and they have babies here. Their offspring is now an American citizen.
Yes. And look, if you look at the 14th Amendment, and I know there's a big controversy over why the 14th Amendment was written. It was to deal with slaves that had been liberated. If you want to talk about a heinous situation, it was about slavery, which was about cheap labor, which again is what immigration seems to be about also, whether it's the high-tech industries as well as people that are working illegally. But I'm of the belief, and this was the training I had at Border Patrol Academy when I started working for the INS. I hate to admit it was 1971, a long time ago. But the training that we received, and I'll go with it, is that a child born in the United States is an American citizen. What I don't understand is why that American citizen then at age 21 can petition for the mother who was here illegally and had that child, so that down the road the mother gets the benefit of residency by virtue of having given birth inside the United States. I think a sensible halfway measure, my judgment, people may take issue with this, is to say, okay, the child is an American, but if you give birth to a child in the United States and you're here illegally, there should be no reward for you for having violated our borders and our laws. And I think that would be a common sense approach.
And also, now we have the children being brought over by the parents who are illegal, and these children attend school. They attend the K through 12 system, and plus they want to go on to college.
Right.
And so now we have a burden upon our education system as well.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a system that's not being burdened.
If they don't speak English, then the American taxpayers pay extra money for courses that teach them that.
Well, the Congressional Budget Office a few years ago did a study, and they said that it costs 20 to 40% more per child to educate a child who did not come into the school system with English language proficiency. Think about that. Think about the remittances being wired out of the United States. For those of you not familiar with the term remittances, it's money that's wired out. And if you go to neighborhoods in New York in particular, go to Roosevelt Avenue. It used to be the center point for the Colombian cartels, which have been supplanted largely by the Mexican cartels in the United States. They have money wire services, dozens and dozens and dozens of them, running 24/7. That is the drain through which billions of American dollars flow every year. It's estimated that last year over $200 billion got wired out of the United States. That's money that wasn't spent in the United States, not invested in the United States. Economists, and I'm certainly no economist, I don't even play one on TV, but economists talk about the multiplier effect. And that was the idea behind the stimulus package, that if you put money into the economy, the money generates business. You make a paycheck, you buy a pair of shoes. The shoe salesman buys a refrigerator. The guy that sold the refrigerator gets some carpenter to build an extension on his back porch. So the money circulates through the economy. Money that's wired out of the United States serves no purpose. You could set fire to it for all the good it would do. Of course, in the winter, maybe it would keep you warm. Right. But this is money that's lost. So we are basically increasing America's national debt by roughly $500 billion when you take the multiplier effect into account through the loss of $200 billion in remittances. And it's not just about Mexico. See, everyone keeps saying Mexico, Mexico, Mexico. Well, yes, because of geography and because the Mexican border is the sole place on the planet where the first and third worlds collide the way it does. But India, globally, gets the greatest amount of remittances wired from the first world. Last year, it's estimated that they were the recipient of over $60 billion. And today, 1 in 3 computer programmers is a foreign national, most likely from India, programming computers in the United States. So this is about taking away jobs and job opportunities for Americans. You have kids that are going to college in the United States, and it's not cheap. And anybody out there who's paying tuition knows it's a big bill.
Right.
Student loans look more like mortgage payments.
Right. And also, I do want to talk about the in-state tuition.
Sure. Absolutely.
Recently, Governor Christie had passed a law that if you were undocumented in New Jersey, you are entitled to in-state tuition.
Can we provide any more incentives for illegal immigration? You know, look, we have a problem with drunk driving. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers sprang up because it's terrible. You know, the morning after my first solo flight when I was in college, I was hit by a drunk driver who almost killed me. So we know that drunk driving is a serious problem. So what did we do? We didn't raise the acceptable blood alcohol level. States lowered it. And then they imposed harsher sanctions against those people caught drunk driving. If there's a problem with the law that's not being abided by, the solution isn't to make the law go away, which is what we're doing with immigration. The solution is to have consequences and make people understand that we are targeting those who violate the law so that there's an increase of the potential of, number one, being caught if you violate the law, and that there will be negative consequences. When you provide incentive after incentive, how in the world could anyone with a straight face be surprised that the result is everybody charging for the border? You know, in a manner of speaking, the Stardust pistol has been fired for aspiring illegal aliens from around the world. And every politician, whether it's the president, whether it's senators like Chuck Schumer, McCain, who do you want to talk about? When they stand there and say, we want to give illegal aliens a pathway to citizenship. You know, we already admit over 1 million lawful immigrants into the United States every year. That's more than the rest of the world combined. That's about 100,000, almost 100,000 per month. We admit tens of thousands of lawfully authorized foreign workers who are here supposedly on temporary visas every month. We admit 500,000 foreign students into the United States every year. Most of them will ultimately get authorization for practical training, which means a job. So we look at the unemployment statistics, and if you believe those numbers, 7.1%, I think Bernie Madoff is the guy behind the scenes figuring out the unemployment stats. It's silly, and everyone knows they're meaningless. Well, the solution isn't to create or to admit more foreign workers than the number of new jobs that you're creating, but most months that's exactly what's happening. So while they're debating whether to extend unemployment benefits, what's happening? We're admitting many more foreign workers. In fact, the president of the Chamber of Commerce was on Fox News and just spoke about it a couple days ago with Bret Baier. We don't have enough jobs, we don't have enough jobs, we don't have enough jobs, and Bret Baier said to him, and what about immigration? Well, we don't have enough workers. Well, wait a moment. Does this guy lack mouth-ear coordination? Could he not hear what his own mouth just said? If you don't have enough jobs, how do we suddenly have a shortage of workers? This is about driving down the wages for all American workers. We're hearing the story about income equality. This is the new buzzword. If you look at a hearing where Alan Greenspan testified for Chuck Schumer on the issue of comprehensive immigration reform back in 2009, he referred to American workers who have skills and education as the privileged elite. I almost fell out of my chair watching the hearing. And in fact, I've written about this for a group called CAPS, Californians for Population Stabilization. They've got it up on their website, capsweb.org. I have it up on my own website, michaelcutler.net. Because to think of American middle-class workers as the privileged elite blows my mind. And he said that they were earning a wage premium. And the way to deal with the wage premium is to import more foreign workers to greatly reduce inequality in wages. Inequality in wages in this case wouldn't mean elevating anyone's paycheck, but lowering it. And what the United States is now doing is creating incentives for foreign workers from other countries like Mexico as well to come here. And rather than demand the real change they should have in their own countries. I mean, Mexico has huge resources. They have the, I think, 16th or 17th largest and most vibrant economy in the world. There's no reason for Mexicans to have to come to the United States to have a decent way of life. It's because there's an oligarchy in Mexico that I think that Chuck Schumer and Bill Gates and all these other folks are envious of. So instead of being at home demanding change, they're kept busy in the United States being exploited by unscrupulous employers. In fact, every time there's an election in Mexico, they campaign in the United States. Think about that.
Wow.
So understand what this is doing across the board. And meanwhile, I can't get away from that national security implication. The 9/11 Commission made it clear that immigration fraud and a lack of border security are the two biggest threats to America's national security, and that it was immigration fraud, people filing for applications like political asylum that they're not entitled to, like the Tsarnaev brothers. They attacked the Boston Marathon. And, you know, I'm Jewish. I was named for my grandma who died in the Holocaust. I'm a big fan of political asylum to provide safe haven to vulnerable people. We are at our best when we're doing that. But the bad guys have seen in our political asylum system, in our compassion weakness. And that's something we should never allow.
Wow. Can you tell us a story like when you arrested somebody?
The Three Bears? Oh, I'm sorry. My goodness, there's so many.
When you had arrested somebody.
There are so many stories. But why don't we talk about a case that really broke my heart? I was asked to put an alien on an airplane, a guy by the name of Ronaldo Rayside. He was a drug trafficker. He had been given a green card. He had his share of the American dream. Because of drug convictions, he was ultimately deported, and I had the privilege of putting this piece of work on an airplane. Came back to the United States illegally. We were never notified. The New York City Police Department under Mayor Giuliani, who maintained a sanctuary policy, and I, for the life of me, can't understand sanctuaries, because if you look at the immigration laws, and here's another section of law for you folks out there to look at, it's Title 8, United States Code, Section 1324, and that deals with harboring, aiding, abetting, encouraging, inducing, harboring, and shielding. Sanctuary cities are guilty of all the above. Wow. And yet the administration does nothing about it. So when Ronaldo Rayside came back to the United States, the NYPD arrested him not once but twice, never notified immigration. And when we hear this nonsense that running the border isn't a crime, boy, anyone that says that, your nose is growing, go see a plastic surgeon quickly. If you run the border after you were deported, it's at minimum a 2-year felony. If you have a criminal conviction, running the border or entering otherwise illegally carries a maximum of 20 years in jail. And I'm very proud of that section of law because I worked with former New York Senator Al D'Amato to get that law passed. And because of it, immigration prosecutions are the most numerous across the country. So Rayside clearly committed a felony by re-entering the United States illegally. The third time, he encountered a 24-year-old police officer by the name of Robert Machadi. Robert Machadi was part of the Brooklyn South Task Force. I did a lot of work with Brooklyn South. He grabbed for the officer's gun. Bullets flew. By the time the encounter was over with, Robert Machadi was dead on a street corner in Brooklyn. I wound up testifying at the trial. His family was there. I can't begin to tell you what that was like. Years later, without realizing that this was about to happen, I walked into a supermarket. This was maybe 20, 22 years after the trial. And guess who's there? This young lady wearing a little miniature badge. And I asked her who the police officer was who gave her the badge. And she said, my father. And I said, where does he work? And with very little emotion, she said, well, he's dead. She said, I don't want to sound like I don't care. She said, it's so sad. She said, I never met my father. I said, he died before you were born? She said, yes. And immediately I realized who this young lady was. This was Robert Machadi's daughter. And I'm getting choked up.
Wow.
I subsequently spoke with Robert Machadi's brother, Tom Machadi, who's now a retired New York City cop. He was his younger brother. He became a cop because of his brother. And we had a lengthy conversation. And he told me that his parents were never the same. His father, who always liked to tell jokes, never told another joke. They were devastated. It destroyed the family. You know, I was with a friend, Don Rosenberg, a couple of weeks ago, last week. His son was run over by an illegal alien in California. And again, driving without a license, and we're hearing this nonsense. We have to provide licenses. We have to provide all these incentives. And when I testified before the New York State Senate about the issue of driver's licenses for illegal aliens, I had a counter proposal because the argument we keep hearing, they get to drive anyway. I said, well, you know, by that reasoning, convicted felons carry guns anyway. So why don't we give every convicted felon in America firearms training and a pistol permit, since they get to carry anyway? And you know what? If we could get them to be more accurate with those guns, they'd be less likely to hit an innocent bystander if they were involved in a shootout. And maybe we can convince them to use trigger locks between drive-bys and bank robberies. You could now argue you've improved public safety. This is the insanity that goes with this whole story. And this isn't a conservative issue. I'm a lifelong Democrat. My dad will always be my biggest hero. He was a plumber. He was a construction worker. I believe in blue-collar America. I believe in hard-working Americans, and this government of ours has now become the biggest impediment to employing Americans. Every day that the immigration laws go unenforced means more aliens are coming into the United States in violation of law. Among them may well be criminals, might be the next group of terrorists that may attack us. We have more workers coming into the United States, more Americans being displaced. How in the world is this a government that lives up to Abraham Lincoln's lofty ideal that he espoused in the Gettysburg Address when he spoke about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people? It's both political parties, but I have to tell you, this current administration has ramped up the war on American workers to an extent that I didn't think was possible by doing everything possible to encourage more illegal immigration and to make more or blur the distinction between illegal versus illegal immigration. Realize, again, I have to keep coming back to the same point. The reason for the immigration laws is to protect innocent lives and the jobs of Americans. Who could possibly be opposed to those two objectives?
The politicians.
Well,
right?
You look at the campaign contributions. Do you know that since 2007, that I just wrote a major article for the Social Contract that will be out shortly, and I did some research, and I was mortified. Guess how much money has been spent since 2007 to lobby for comprehensive immigration reform?
I can't even imagine.
You should wear a seatbelt for this one.
Uh-oh. Hold on.
over $1.5 billion. That was not just a campaign contribution, folks. That was an investment because of the money that they expect to receive in return. You know what Bill Gates calls forward? He and Zuckerberg created this website, forward.us, FWD. I call it BWD, backward US. This is a thumb in the eye of every hardworking American. And you watch the news programs, and so many of these journalists are so quick to criticize unemployed Americans that are on disability. What in the world do you do when you lose your job and you can't replace it unless perhaps maybe you can get lucky enough to get a job flipping hamburgers at a hamburger stand? You know, on the one hand, I understand why people want higher minimum wage. And people that criticize higher minimum wage better understand that at the rate we're going, that's going to become the standard wage for America if Alan Greenspan has his way with his reduction of inequality in wages based on education. That was the American dream. Get the better education, acquire the highest skill set, make more money. The guy with the bachelor's degree makes more than the high school graduate, but less than the person with the master's degree. The guy with the PhD should make more than the guy with the master's degree. Alan Greenspan says, not so much. Let's bring in foreign workers to undercut American workers so that we can crank up profits for corporations. And where does that leave the American dream and the average American?
Wow. Maybe it pays to be illegal.
Well, it's certainly because, well, you know, Groucho Marx once remarked that he wouldn't want to belong to an organization that would have him as a member. I'm starting to feel that way about my citizenship.
Wow. Okay, we have to wrap up.
Okay.
And thank you for coming on our show. Michael Cutler, former INS agent, special agent. And to our listeners, for more information on the show, please go to campusteaparties.com. That's campusteaparties.com. And thank you very much.